Now, Harry Wills is best known for being the fighter that Jack Dempsey avoided during his title reign. Aside from Gene Tunney, Wills was the best contender that Dempsey could have faced during his tenure as champion. But the fight would never happen because of Dempsey's promoter, Tex Rickard, who feared that Wills could beat his man, and the powers that be did not want another Jack Johnson on their hands. But Wills was the polar opposite of Johnson in temperament. A quiet man, he grew up in poverty in New Orleans in the late 1800s, and he grew to a height of, some report as 6'2", some report him as being as tall as 6'4", and he usually weighed about a little over 200 pounds. This was a gargantuan-sized heavyweight back in the early 1900s, and he started his career in 1910. 4 years later, he was matched with the veteran Sam Langford, who knocked him out in 14 rounds. Wills was worn down by the more experienced Langford, but still managed to knock down Langford 4 times. A month later, he would lose to another notable of the time period, Sam McVeigh, who outworked him en route to a 20 rounds point win. But Wills would remain undaunted. He would fight the great Sam Langford a total of 22 times, and for the most part he had Langford's number. 2 of the more notable fights would take place in 1916, and in a bout of February of that year, Wills was knocked out by Langford in a Fight of the Year brawl. He would not only lose the fight, but also his fiancée, Edna Jones, as the two were scheduled to be married after the fight. But Miss Edna became so distraught upon Wills losing that she committed suicide. She was convinced that Wills's career was going nowhere. And 6 years later, her assessment seemed to be prophetic. After 9 years in the game, Wills had yet to secure a title shot. Dempsey had been champion for over a year and was content to take on the white contenders and tour the country with his famous actress wife, Estelle Taylor. Wills, meanwhile, was stuck in obscurity. He was frustrated and ready to retire until he met a manager named Patty Mullins. Now, Mullins would convince promoters that Wills could sell tickets. It took the Black Panther out of low-rent arenas where only black fighters faced each other, and he showcased Wills to a larger audience. A mythical world-colored heavyweight championship title was created, and Wills would defeat Sam Langford for the belt, which was studded with diamonds, rubies, and gold. But Langford had pawned off the gold from the belt and gave Wills the pawn ticket in addition to the belt. But Wills and Mullins wanted the real belt that Dempsey held, so they sought out the #1 contender, the 6'5" Fred Fulton. Wills would be the underdog, but he took out Fulton in 3 rounds. The following years would see Wills' reputation grow as he would defend his colored heavyweight title over 26 times. Now, because of this, the boxing public began calling for a Dempsey-Wills fight. Dempsey was criticized for not only avoiding Wills, but also criticized for failing to serve in the military during World War I. Both Wills and Dempsey wanted the fight, but there was one all-important man who didn't, and that was Dempsey's promoter, Tex Rickard. Now, during this time, Rickard was the most powerful man in boxing. He had promoted the first $1 million match in Dempsey versus George Carpentier, and he also promoted Jack Johnson against James J. Jeffries. So when Johnson destroyed Jeffries in that match, race riots broke out across the country, and Rickard had made it a point to never again put up what he described as a mixed match. So Rickard instead opted to put Dempsey in with the Argentine Luis Firpo, which resulted in restoring some of Dempsey's dwindling reputation. But Wills' manager went to court in order to try and keep the match from happening. He protested that it should have been Wills in there instead of Firpo, but Mullins' attempts were unsuccessful. Now, Dempsey would take out Firpo, but not before being knocked out of the ring himself. Mullins decided to put Wills in against Firpo, and if Wills beat Firpo more impressively than Dempsey, he could then demand a title shot. But Wills was now 35 years old, and he wasn't able to stop Firpo. He clearly outpointed Firpo, but under New Jersey law during that time, no decision was rendered. Most observers thought that Wills should have won a lopsided decision. He floored Firpo in the second, but then eased up on his opponent. Mullins instructed Wills that he wanted him to look good, but not too good, in order not to scare off Tex Rickard. Now, after Wills' bout with Firpo, a match with Dempsey was signed. Dempsey himself pressed for the fight, and contracts were signed for them to face each other on July 4th, 1925. Now, Wills was now 36 years old. Dempsey himself was 30, but he had not fought in 2 years. Wills was given a $50,000 signing bonus, but the fight never happened. Wills' fans claimed that Dempsey was afraid and were angered that their man was cheated out of the chance to fight for the title. What happened was Rickard killed the match by pricing Dempsey out of the fight. He demanded too high of a guaranteed payment, and he allowed Wills to keep the $50,000, which led people to believe that Dempsey had paid off Wills. Rickard instead had someone else in mind to face Dempsey, Gene Tunney, a clean-cut Marine who was on the rise, and the boxing world was stunned to see him upset Jack Dempsey over 10 rounds. Now, only 2 weeks later, the 37-year-old Wills was put in with the young Jack Sharkey. Wills's old rival, Sam Langford, helped train Sharkey and gave him all the tips he needed to batter the aging Wills over 13 rounds before the referee disqualified the Black Panther for holding. It was a humiliating loss for Wills, and it ended whatever interest the public had in him. By 1927, Wills was 38 years old, and he was knocked out by the powerful Spaniard Paulino Uskudin. Wills would have a handful of fights beyond that before retiring in 1932 at the age of 43. His story doesn't end tragically, however, as he would go on to become a prominent real estate investor in Harlem, New York. In his later years, he would go on a 1-month fast every February, but he would die in 1958 at age 69 due to diabetes.